the book is better than the movie. The book is not better than the movie. This book took me a year to get through. I feel like she wrote this book just for me. Plot twist. I have a little special insider knowledge on this one. Welcome to my first ever booktube. My name is Christine and today I will be organizing my books because they are finally out of storage after 3 years. I'm organizing these into books I love, books I hate, and books I haven't read yet. So let's get reading. We're starting off really strong here with The Black Dahlia by James Ellroy. I love The Black Dahlia because it had multiple plot twists that I was not able to guess first. I've read enough mystery novels that I can usually guess the killer, like especially in Nancy Drew books, and even on the movie Murder on the Orient Express, which is not an easy one to guess, but it's a gorgeous cinematic movie and you should definitely watch it. But this book, The Black Dahlia, I did not guess the killer in. So I highly recommend it just for that it's a really good mystery novel and it will get you. So next up we have the first book I have not finished reading. I've started it twice but haven't finished it. The Claw by Nora Lofts. This was one of those like dollar book bin books that I started and just haven't finished and I want to finish. I just wasn't in the right mindset to read it when I did. So I like it so far, but it is going on the haven't read it yet pile. The Plague by Albert Camus. Camus, it's French. If you like historical fiction, this is a must-read. The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand is a really special book to me because when I was reading it, I really felt like she wrote it just for me. It even smells like a good book. This book made me realize I had never truly identified with a main character in a story before, and most of my enjoyment of books was just an escapism thing, just a daydreaming thing. Even with my favorite redheaded characters like Pippi Longstocking and Anne of Green Gables, which are also great books. Howard Rourke is a very special character to me because the way he views the world and the way he views art are very, very similar to the way I view them. The Fountainhead is quite a long book, but I breezed right through it. I think I read it in like a week or so because it was just so good. And it has a lot of like architectural information in there, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to everybody, but I had a special connection with this book and I really enjoyed it. You've already watched the movie, but the next one is The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. One of the reviews on the back of this book says, Blatty makes you think this scary tale really might have happened. And while it didn't happen exactly as it did in the book or the movie, this is very loosely based on a true story. Whether you believe in demonic possession or not, Reagan was based on a real boy who underwent an exorcism. And I have a little bit of insider knowledge on what has happened since the events of the true story. The real boy died in the hospital. I believe it was St. Alexia Brothers, but my grandmother actually went to nursing school there, and she said they completely sealed off the whole wing of the hospital where he had died in, and you would be like kicked out of the program, you would be fired if you tried to go in there. Like it was totally, completely off limits. I also worked with a woman who had been inside the house that the boy had lived in. One of her friends bought it, and even though that house has been blessed more times than a church, there's no demonic feeling in the house at all. It's just a regular house. But the room where the boy lived in is always cold, and there's a weird stain on the floor. And I know there's no way to verify that, but she was very religious. I don't think she would have lied to me. She was a really nice lady, so I believe it. But as far as reading the book goes, I recommend it. If you like the movie, you're gonna like the book. I try not to say the book was better than the movie because a lot of them are very comparable, and this is one of them. don't really know what to say about these next two because I haven't really read them. This is a yoga book that some like street scammer shoved in my face at a like multicultural food festival, and I haven't had a chance to read it yet, and I haven't been terribly interested. And this is a creativity prompt book. It comes with like a bunch of stones that have runes on them, and you pull a stone out and you go to the book and it gives you like a prompt depending on that stone, and I just lose it. I lose one half of it all the time. I either know where the stones are or I know where the book are, and I'm gonna figure it out someday. Another one that you have absolutely seen on TV, The Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. I really love the chalk drawing art on this book, and I did enjoy reading it, but the movie is way better than the book. It's so much more vibrant, and the story makes a little bit more sense. There's also a lot of adventures they went on in the book past where the movie left off, so it's definitely a different read, and I think it is worth reading, especially to kids. It is a kid's book, but I preferred the movie better. But I did still like the book, and it's not going in the books I hate section because it was a good one. This next one is the first book I hated. The Portrait of an Artist by a Young Man, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. This book is not a portrait of the artist as a young man. This book is about a boarding school that he went to. It is very, very boring, and my dad was a pastor. I don't need a book preaching to me about religion and boarding schools. It was not what I expected from it. I thought it was going to be much more about an artist and not his boring boarding school. The next three books are all by the same author, Margaret Attwood. I have read The Blind Assassin and The Robber Bride, but I have not read Bodily Harm yet. You've seen her on Netflix, but Margaret Attwood is one of the few authors I will tell you cannot get the full experience by watching the film adaptations. Her books are always better than the movie just because of the way she writes and her character development and the way she treats her characters. Take The Blind Assassin, for example. It starts out with the main character's sister Laura driving her car off a bridge, and you think, oh, Laura, she's just a troubled child, she's mentally ill, and by the end of it you realize what drove her to that point, and you have a much different look of that character and of the main character as well. And those are just little subtleties within the book that you don't come across as well on TV, just because of the way she writes them and the way the story unfolds. It's much better in book version. Margaret Attwood is one of my favorite authors of all time, so two of her books are going in the books I love to pile, and this one that I haven't read yet, still going and haven't read yet, but I know I will read it before I even do. Did I say I know I will read it? I know I will like it before I even read it. Can't get my words right today. Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. This is a difficult book to get through in more ways than one. Lolita is a child who is preyed upon by an adult man, and the book is written from his perspective. It is extremely detailed but not graphic, and you can tell that Nabokov really respected the material he was writing about, but just because of the subject of the book, and he wrote it in 1955, it was rejected by most of the publishers, I think like 12 or 13 publishers when he did originally go to print it. But the most difficult thing about this book is reading it. It's a very, very high reading level, and you cannot get past an entire page in this book without looking at a dictionary. So if you're not great at, vocabulary, or you struggle reading higher level books, this one definitely isn't for you. But it is beautifully written, even as an English adaptation from Russian. It is a wonderful book to read if you can get past the subject matter. And I will tell you, the ending is appropriate. The ending is very good, and it makes the rest of the book kind of tie into itself and not just make it a really unpleasant book to read. It has a good, appropriate ending. This is terrible. Hunger Point by Gillian Medoff, soon to be a Lifetime original movie, and it reads like a Lifetime original movie. Oh, this book was written over 200 years ago, but you know it very well. This is Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. I read Frankenstein and Bram Stoker's Dracula in middle school, and I fell in love with them immediately. There is a lot more depth to these books than the, Hollywood tropes and the Hollywood movies portray. And while the story is basically the same, I do think they're reading if you enjoy books and you want to get the full historical story from it. Another one that was turned into a movie from a book, Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden. I have seen the movie and I read the book, and I have to say they are both great in their own way. And while the movie is a very loyal adaptation to the book, it is cinematically gorgeous. It is stunning. I love what they did with the movie. But, and this is the book was better than the movie. I don't think the book was better than the movie, but I think you need to read the book first because there's so much information and so much historical context in the book that is not shown in the movie. So there are parts of the movie that don't make as much sense without having read the book first. Memoirs of a Geisha was a really special book for me because when I was a little girl, we housed a Japanese foreign exchange student named Keiko, and she introduced me to Japanese culture at a very young age, so I've always been really fascinated with it. I've always liked learning about it, and I always thought geishas were really beautiful, but I didn't know what a geisha really was or how they were mistreated until reading this book. So I really appreciated learning more about the historical context of geishas because I didn't know much about them before reading this book, even though I did know a lot about Japanese culture and history. This book took me a year to get through. Moby Dick by Herman Melville. I thought I got bored reading Jane Austen and John Steinbeck, but Herman Melville takes the cake for the most boring author I have ever read. Moby Dick was published in 1851, and if you want to read a book from the 1800s, I highly recommend reading Frankenstein more than Moby Dick. The dialogue in this book is really weird, and most of this book is just about whaling and the anatomy of whales, which is interesting and stuff I didn't know before reading this, but it's very, very boring. I think the most interesting part of this book happened in maybe the first 100 or so pages, where they talked about how whaling ships had shareholders, like a company has shareholders, and that they would have to go out and hunt whales, bring them back, and then the money would go to shareholders who owned part of the ship. But that didn't make the book interesting. That was just an interesting little tidbit. I will read hundreds of pages in an afternoon, but I can only get through about 10 to 15 pages of Moby Dick at a time, and that's why it took so long to read. And I finally finished it when I had 150 pages left, and I got snowed in for the weekend. I couldn't get to work, and I was like, alright, I'm gonna finish this book. I'm gonna close it and get it out and so I can read another one, and it was worth it. I'm glad I finished it, but I absolutely hated this book. Celtic Spirals Handbook by Sheila Sturrock. I have not used this. I think I got this from a friend back in high school, and I always wanted to do some Celtic spirals with it, but I just never had the motivation. And looking at them now, I think it might be fun to do some Celtic spiral embroidery with this book. So even though I haven't read it, haven't used it, I think I will get some use out of it at some point. A Wicked Women of Missouri and Wicked St. Louis. My aunt bought these for me for Christmas for a few years ago, and I just wasn't interested in reading nonfiction at the time, and then they got put in storage. So I haven't read these, but I probably will read them at some point. And another one I haven't read yet, 33 Men by Jonathan Franklin. This is a real story about some men that got trapped in a coal mine. I believe it was a coal mine. Yeah, I don't see what type of mine it was, but I do want to read this book eventually. I got this book from a neighbor, and I meant to return it to her, but I didn't realize she was moving out, so I never did. And I just never read it, even though it's been a few years. But it does seem interesting, and as I said, I haven't been wanting to read any nonfiction for a while, but I will read this one eventually. Reckless by Andrew Gross. It's really big on the front. I also got this from the neighbor who gave me the book on the 33 guys trapped in a mine. I don't know what kind of mine. I did read this one, Reckless, and it was kind of boring. It kind of read like your standard action movie, and it just wasn't very interesting. And as I said with the Black Dahlia earlier, I guessed what was gonna happen, and so that kind of ruined it for me. But now we're down to the pretty books. Canterbury Classics, Classic Tales of Horror. It has books like Telltale Heart, Dracula's Guest, Devil and Tom Walker, An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, Kerfall, Elixir of Life, Fall of the House of Usher. So I have not read this book yet, but I've read a lot of the stories in it. That's why my sister got it for me, because she knew I liked a lot of the stories that were in it, and we like books, and it just looked really cute and pretty, and I like to have it on my shelf. My sister also got me this next one, the Brothers Grimm Fairy Tale Collection. Complete fairy tale collection. So I am most of the way through this book. I don't read it like very many stories in one setting. I just read like 2 or 3, sometimes 4 if they're short, because something about the Brothers Grimm is that every story was a message for children, to give them a direction in life, to teach them to be hard workers, or to respect people, or to respect themselves, or to, you know, not waste away and not just be lazy all the time. This is not your Disney classic fairy tales. These are what the fairy tales, the Disney classics, are based on. The Little Mermaid turned into sea foam because she thought the grass was greener on the other side, and it really wasn't, and she threw her life away for some guy who didn't even know her. But my absolute favorite story in here is one called Faithful John. I'm not gonna ruin the story for you, but it's a little messed up, and it's a little bit longer than some of the other ones in here, and it makes you think. It's a really gorgeous book. I got it because it was gorgeous, but also because I wanted to read it. Jules Verne, 7 of his novels, and I still haven't read it yet, but I definitely will at some point. I haven't been rushing to read this one because I already know most of the stories, but I want to read it, and it's pretty, and I shouldn't just let this book waste away on the shelf. The Complete Tales of Edgar Allan Poe. I haven't read this entire book yet, but I've read a fair amount of it. I used to read a lot of Edgar Allan Poe, especially back in high school. The Cask of Amontillado is my absolute favorite Poe story. But I haven't read this in 7 years. It's been a while. I haven't read any Edgar Allan Poe in 7 years. And I remember because last time I read this, my neighbor, who was 19 years old at the time and very drunk, was having a fight with her boyfriend, and she came over to my apartment and she's like, Christine, can I stay at your place tonight? And I was like, you know, I don't have a couch, but you're welcome to sleep on my floor. And she picked up this book because I guess she liked Edgar Allan Poe too, and she tried to read the same page 6 times before I stopped her and put it away and put her to bed. Alright, I haven't read these. This is a collection. Hannibal and Hannibal Rising by Thomas Harris. I'm sure you've seen the cult classic movies, Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal Lecter, everybody's seen them. I buy all of my books secondhand, whether it's thrift stores, garage sales, whatever. I bought these at a thrift store, and I was not able to find Red Dragon and Silence of the Lambs at a thrift store, so I actually went and ordered them online this week. They should be coming later next week or the week after, and I'm really excited to read them. They're probably going to be the next series that I actually read and get into. I just have this like weird thing where I don't like to read books in a series unless I have access to the whole series, because I used to go to the library and check out like a lot of manga like Sailor Moon, Naruto, that kind of stuff, and I'd get to like 5 or 7 and I wouldn't be able to read any more of it because they'd be missing one. So I've been putting off reading these until Red Dragon and Silence of the Lambs come, and once I do, I'm just gonna binge them all and read everything all at once. Here's another pretty book that I also haven't read yet. This is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. When I bought Anna Karenina, I was actually looking for War and Peace or Crime and Punishment, and I wasn't specifically looking for this book, but I got it anyway because it's pretty, and I like pretty books. And I haven't gotten around to reading yet, but I'm really excited to, and I've been thinking about reading it lately, but then I wanted to read Silence of the Lambs, that whole series first, so I went and ordered those instead. I'm gonna try and say this right. Kusadama Origami, or Kusadama Origami by Ekaterina Lukasheva. That sounds Russian, she doesn't sound Japanese. I did a lot of origami as a kid because that Japanese foreign exchange student Keiko that we had, she left us this origami book in like entirely Japanese. We couldn't understand a single thing it said, but the pictures are really good. So I did grow up learning some origami, and then my aunt got me this book which had some like different fun shapes that I haven't made before. And while I haven't done anything in this book, I've actually extensively read through it and like practiced doing it in my head. And as soon as I like get some pretty origami paper, I'm gonna do some stuff in this because I think that these are really cool designs and I like them a lot. And this is a book for a sock loom, and I don't know where the sock loom is right now, but this is the sock I made with it that only took me 6 years to make. And now we're down to sewing books. I have Fabric Manipulation, 150 Creative Sewing Techniques by Ruth Singer, and The Art of Manipulating Fabric by Colette Wolfe. So these books are very comparable in price, but they're not comparable in the like material and instructional and like knowledge information in them. I highly prefer The Art of Manipulating Fabric by Colette Wolfe. This is a much more instructional and useful fabric manipulation book. I found Ruth Singer to be a little bit of a pretentious artist, saying like, oh, use only real cotton fabric without telling you why she's using real cotton fabric, and it just comes off as like a superiority complex thing. Oh, I can afford real cotton, that kind of thing. And I found her projects to be quite ugly. Colette Wolfe uses white cotton fabric because it's the easiest to make these different fabric treatments with, and it shows up better in pictures, and you can like compare all the different techniques and what they look like, and it's a lot more comprehensive. It will fundamentally change the way you sew and the kind of projects you're wanting to make. And the last book I have to share with you today is the Singer Sewing Book Revised Edition, The Complete Guide to Sewing, from like the 1970s or 80s. My aunt had this book a really long time, and I made sure I snatched it up when they were taking all her stuff to the thrift store, and I just devoured this book. It has so much good information on clothing construction, and it's really, really beneficial if you want to make your clothing that you sew look more polished. So I don't know if you're going to be able to find one of these because they're going to be hard to find, but I definitely recommend finding a singer sewing book if you can find one. And that concludes my library of books. A few books that I didn't mention because I don't have them anymore, like the Harry Potter series, the Lord of the Rings series. I loved all those books and I read them as a kid growing up. And there's a million more books that I've read because I checked them out at a library somewhere and I just don't have them. So if there's any of your like favorite books that you've read or you want to see if I've read them, I'll let you know if I've read them and if I like them or not. Just leave them below in the comments. Let me know what your favorite books are too. Or what books you didn't like Twilight, 50 Shades of Grey. Those are way overhyped. And I know this is a little bit of a different topic than I normally talk about, so if you like this video, please leave a like on the video. Thank you guys so much for watching my video today. I will see you guys next time. Hi, Kojo. Hi, bud. Hey, dude. Wish you was a sweetie cat.